Going through my late husband's belongings, I discovered a note. It said that behind the wardrobe in the basement there was a hidden room, and I was to open it on June 4th, 2026. I moved the wardrobe, went downstairs, and found a door. Inside was a safe. When I opened it, I couldn't believe what I saw. Good day, dear listeners. It's Diana again. I'm happy you're here with me. Please subscribe, like the video, and tell me in the comments which city you're listening from so I can see how far my story has reached. For 23 years, I believed I knew my husband completely. That's what long marriages do. They create a false sense of certainty. You stop asking questions because you assume you already have all the answers. You know how he takes his coffee? How he clears his throat before bad news? Even the sound of his footsteps at night. You think that is intimacy, but I now understand it wasn't. Thomas Calloway died on a Tuesday in March from a heart attack. The doctor said it was sudden, as if that made it easier. He was 56, healthy, sharp, and still full of presence. He coached children's sports, made people laugh at family gatherings, and never forgot birthdays. By all appearances, he was a good man. I believed that completely, until I went through his things. After the funeral, everything became a blur of condolences, paperwork, and silence. Our house in Columbus felt empty and too large. I slept on my side of the bed out of habit, leaving his untouched until a grief counselor advised me otherwise. 2 weeks after April began, I started sorting through his home office alone. His daughter offered to help, but I wanted privacy. Going through a deceased person's belongings feels like both archaeology and mourning at the same time. The first strange discovery was a second phone hidden in a shoebox in his closet, wrapped in a sock. It was a cheap prepaid Samsung with no data on it. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe work security, maybe travel related. He had been a partner at Callaway Hart Properties with his business partner Diana Hart, whom I had met several times. She was always polite but distant. I charged the phone, but it was completely wiped. The second discovery was a note hidden under his workbench drawer in the basement. It was written in his handwriting and said there was a hidden room behind a shelf, and that it should be opened on June 4th, 2026. That date was 14 months after his death. I kept questioning why he would leave something so specific, so delayed, instead of a clear explanation. When I checked, the shelf was a heavy unit against the basement wall. Behind it was a concealed door with a keypad lock glowing red. Standing there, I realized I had found something I could not ignore. I didn't open it. I made tea instead and sat in shock at the kitchen table where we had shared thousands of meals. I had 14 months of unanswered questions. Over the following weeks, I began documenting everything that felt unusual. I used a legal pad and treated it like evidence, not emotion. The prepaid phone had been active for 4 years despite being wiped clean. His travel records didn't match his stated trips. Hotel receipts showed inconsistencies, including stays in cities he claimed not to be in and charges for 2 people. Financial records also didn't add up. Profits and distributions from the company seemed lower than expected. Something was being hidden or redirected, though I couldn't yet understand how. Diana Hart and her brother Connor, a lawyer, were involved in much of the company's documentation and estate handling. At the time, I trusted their professionalism. Now I wasn't so sure. Fear set in gradually. I was alone, without legal expertise, realizing that powerful people might prefer I stay confused and uninformed. But I had been a history teacher. I knew how narratives control outcomes. I decided I would not let others define the truth. I hired a lawyer named Ellen Marsh, recommended by a friend who had been through a divorce. Ellen specialized in estate disputes and financial fraud. I told her only that something felt wrong with my husband's estate, not about the hidden room or phone. I also researched Callaway Hart Properties at the library, studying public records and corporate filings. Connor Hart's name appeared repeatedly. As time passed, the date on the basement note felt closer. Ellen told me she could begin legal action to demand financial transparency and review documents tied to the estate. But once filed, the other side would know within days. Soon after, Connor Hart called me, politely offering help and calling my concerns overwhelming grief. Diana later called unusually warm, suggesting lunch. Both felt like probing attempts to understand what I knew. I shared everything with Ellen. Then I was contacted by Gail Peterson, a former employee of the firm. We met in a cafe where she revealed she had been forced to notarize documents without reviewing them properly. She had kept copies. She handed me an envelope. Inside were property transfers, LLC documents, and a trust that shocked me. It showed that a large portion of Thomas's real estate had been transferred into a trust benefiting Diana Hart. It had been signed years earlier and never disclosed during probate. At that moment, I understood the full scale of it. My husband's assets had been quietly moved, and his business partner and her brother were deeply involved. I drove home in silence, careful and controlled, then called Ellen and told her everything I had just learned. There was a pause on the line. "Bring it in tomorrow morning," she said. "First thing?" I said I would. Then I sat in my kitchen in my quiet house, thinking about Thomas, no longer with grief, but with something colder, sharper, and more clarifying. June 4th arrived on a Thursday. I hadn't slept well in the days leading up to it, not out of fear exactly, but from the restless tension of someone who has long been preparing for a moment that is finally arriving. Ellen had securely copied and filed the documents from Gail. She had also brought in a forensic accountant, David Park, who spent weeks reviewing Callaway Hart's financial records obtained through probate. His preliminary conclusion, stated carefully in professional terms, was consistent with systematic asset concealment spanning at least 6 years. I told no one about the room. Not Claire, not Patricia, not anyone except Ellen. She advised me to wait until I fully understood what I was dealing with. I went to the basement alone at 9 a.m. The shelf slid easily once I knew how to move it. Slightly left, then forward. Behind it, the keypad glowed. I had considered the code for days. Thomas was a man of patterns. I tried our wedding date. Nothing. I tried Claire's birthday. Nothing. Then I entered the date we first met. October 11th, 1998. The lock clicked open. The room was about 10 by 12 feet, clearly built by Thomas himself. Along one wall were metal shelves filled with labeled accordion files in his handwriting. In the center stood a bolted floor safe. Beside it, a small table held a sealed envelope with my name on it. I sat on the floor before opening it, my legs unsteady. The letter was 4 pages long. Thomas had known he was ill before he told me, diagnosed with an early cardiac condition 18 months before his death. That knowledge, he wrote, led him to take actions he now felt compelled to explain. The safe combination was our daughter's middle name, Rose, converted into numbers. Inside the safe were originals of the documents Gail had shown me, along with more records, USB drives containing emails and recordings, and a handwritten ledger tracking 6 years of diverted assets and underreported distributions. There was also a second letter from an independent attorney outlining Thomas's account and naming Diana Hart and Connor Hart as co-conspirators. The total concealed amount was estimated at roughly $2.3 million. I photographed everything before touching it further and called Ellen immediately. She arrived within the hour with a notary and document box. We worked in silence, methodically. At one point, she picked up the ledger, looked at it, and set it down carefully without speaking. Later, we learned someone had been watching the house. Connor Hart had hired a private investigator who documented Ellen's arrival and reported it back. By early afternoon, Connor contacted Ellen directly. He threatened to file an emergency motion to seal the room and block the use of any materials taken from it, claiming they were part of the partnership estate. Ellen called me from her car. "He's escalating," she said. "They know you've been in the room." That evening, Diana Hart came to my house unannounced. Connor waited in a car at the curb. She spoke carefully, saying the documents needed context. I told her all communication had to go through my attorney and closed the door. After they left, I called Ellen. She filed for a protective order the next morning. I took a few days away at my sister Joanna's house in Cincinnati. I didn't explain everything, just enough to say I was dealing with something complicated. I walked, slept, and tried to reset my mind. When I returned, I felt unusually steady. 12 days after June 4th, Connor sent an offer through Ellen. $400,000 in exchange for silence, an NDA, and no legal challenge to the firm. I read it, set it aside, and looked out at the garden Thomas had built. It was structured as mercy, but functioned as a fraction of what had been taken. I told Ellen to reject it. She did. The response came quickly, this time more forceful. Warning of legal escalation and challenges to the evidence. Still, I moved through my days with unexpected calm. I walked every morning, made coffee, reviewed documents, and spoke with the forensic accountant. I wasn't hiding. Patricia visited and told me plainly I had been the most organized person in the school. It made me laugh for the first time in weeks. Ellen also put me in touch with an informal support network for spouses who had uncovered financial deception. I read their stories, similar patterns, different names. It helped to see I wasn't alone in the structure of it. I eventually told Claire everything. She was quiet for a long time, then asked what I needed. I said nothing yet, just that she should know. She came home the following weekend and stayed with me while I worked through files. One Saturday in early July, Diana and Connor came to the house together. I saw their car before they knocked. Diana carried cookies. Connor stood slightly behind her. They presented themselves as calm, reasonable, almost neighborly. They asked to speak without lawyers. I refused. Connor hinted at reputational damage to Thomas if the matter went to court. Diana suggested Thomas would have wanted family understanding rather than litigation. I told them everything would be handled legally. Their tone shifted, less warmth, more control. They warned that the process would become public and painful. I told them to speak to my attorney. Then, I closed the door. After they left, I stood in the hallway listening to the engine fade away, my hands shaking, not from fear alone, but from the reality that the conflict had fully arrived. What remained was no longer uncertainty. It was escalation. Those threats weren't empty. Connor was a lawyer. He knew exactly how to make things expensive, slow, and exhausting in ways that didn't depend on winning. But then, something unexpected happened. The fear didn't weaken me. It clarified everything. Because underneath it, there was something steadier. The image of a tin of cookies offered like peace while delivering a warning, and the carefully casual outfits, the Thomas would have wanted this tone used like a weapon. They were scared, and people who truly hold power don't show up on a Saturday morning with cookies. They were scared, and I was the reason. I went upstairs, sat at my desk, and wrote a detailed email to Ellen documenting the visit word for word, including timing. I sent it at 11:43 a.m. Then I called Claire. She came back from the coffee shop within minutes with 2 cups of coffee. She set one in front of me and asked, without hesitation, what they had said about her. I told her everything. She went quiet for a moment, then said one word. Cowards. Precise, controlled, and final. I drank my coffee outside in the garden. Everything was still and alive. The lavender I had planted 2 years earlier was finally taking root properly. Some things simply take time. I wasn't going to stop. The hearing was set for a Thursday in September, 10 weeks after their visit. Ellen had secured an emergency evidentiary hearing to determine whether the $2.3 million trust transfer was legally valid under Ohio law. It wasn't the final trial, but it was the turning point. Claire came with me to the courthouse in Columbus. I wore a dark blazer, carried a folder I didn't need but held anyway. Inside, I felt an unexpected calm. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Plain wood panels, fluorescent lighting, and an atmosphere designed to contain conflict rather than dramatize it. Connor and Diana arrived with 2 additional attorneys, projecting strength. Diana looked composed in a tailored suit, but her grip on her pen was tight. Ellen presented the case cleanly, without theatrics, just facts building into something unavoidable. She introduced the notarized documents from Gail Peterson, the forensic accounting report from David Park showing over $1 million in underpaid distributions, and the authenticated audio recordings from Thomas's basement. The recordings changed everything. 2 short clips played through the courtroom speakers. When they ended, the room fell completely silent. Diana didn't move. Connor quietly passed her a note. She didn't look at it. Connor argued against admissibility, but the judge had already reviewed and rejected that challenge. He then questioned the accounting and tried to undermine Gail's credibility. None of it landed. Then came the judge's question. Why wasn't the trust disclosed during probate? Connor gave a technical explanation. The judge cut through it immediately, asking whether he actually believed his own argument. There was a pause, long enough to matter. Diana looked at him for the first time with visible uncertainty. Not strategy, something closer to fear. When she testified, Ellen guided her precisely through inconsistencies. Diana claimed context was missing. Ellen introduced documents proving no such additional arrangements existed. Each answer narrowed her position further. By the time the recordings were replayed and compared to her testimony, there was no stable version of events left to defend. It was not dramatic. It was structural failure, the kind where something only appears solid until pressure reveals it never truly was. When the hearing ended, the judge indicated she was inclined to void the trust due to fraud. A written decision would follow. In the hallway, Ellen said quietly, "That went well." Claire simply held my hand. A month later, the written ruling arrived. The trust was voided entirely. The court found constructive fraud against marital interest under Ohio law. The $2.3 million reverted to Thomas's estate. The judge also referred Connor Hart for disciplinary review with the Ohio State Bar, citing serious ethical violations. Ellen added that civil fraud proceedings would continue separately. What followed was less dramatic but equally decisive. Facing overwhelming evidence, the opposing side settled. The estate recovered the funds, along with additional compensation for damages and fees. Connor's legal career collapsed afterward under formal findings of misconduct and disbarment proceedings. Diana left Columbus within a year. I didn't follow where she went. Ellen's role was steady, precise, and effective throughout. I told her so at the end. She simply said, "Cases should go like this. They don't always." I sold the house the following spring, not out of escape, but completion. It no longer held the version of life I needed. I moved nearby into a smaller home with light and a south-facing garden. The basement became a writing room. Claire and I became closer than we had ever been. Not repaired, just clearer. Life didn't restart dramatically. It just resumed, differently shaped. The lavender from the old garden took root in the new one. Some things do.